Have you ever wondered why some people are willing to step away from the safest path, abandoning everything certain to chase a dream the world calls madness? Today, perhaps more than ever, we are obsessed with stability, a prestigious degree, a steady career, a pre-written map for life. But there was a man who chose to walk in the opposite direction, who left behind the certainty of Harvard and stepped into the unknown, creating a technological empire no one had ever imagined. This story is not about wealth or technology. It is about the greatest confrontation a human being can experience. The confrontation with one's own shadow. At the heart of this journey lies a truth. Not all brilliance is born from light. Some are forged in deep pits, in the fear of being left behind, in the weight of misunderstanding, in the burning desire to be seen. Bill Gates was not destined from birth to stand on a pedestal. His childhood was filled with pressure, a family who wanted him to fit a mold, a world that demanded he become someone he wasn't sure he wanted to be. And in that tension, the seed of longing was planted. People think leaving Harvard was a reckless act, but for Gates, it was a direct collision with the greatest fear of all, the fear of failure and being left behind. When he closed the door to the university, he closed the door to certainty. Each step forward was a step into darkness, where there was no one to guide him, no one to praise him, no structure to hold on to. Only himself and one question: would he have the courage to believe in himself when the whole world said no? And in that precarious moment, something began to awaken. He began to realize that it was the darkness that had trained his endurance. Every time people dismissed him for being eccentric, every time they said his ideas were unrealistic, it was like small stones thrown into his soul, gathering into a heavy boulder. But instead of letting it crush him, Gates lifted it and turned it into a stepping stone. Through sleepless nights, he coded, he tried, he failed, and he tried again. The outside world underestimated him, but deep inside, he knew he was being shaped for a place few could understand. What most don't see is that to build an empire like Microsoft requires more than intellect. It requires an inner strength that can be almost ruthless with oneself. Gates learned discipline, learned to remain silent in the face of ridicule, learned to turn insecurity into fuel. This is the essence of what Carl Jung called individuation. Going through the darkness to discover the light, not in the world, but within yourself. The further he went, the more he saw the invisible walls people build around themselves. Fear of judgment, obsession with perfection, the need for validation. And he understood that breaking these walls is true freedom. Those first software lines, those early systems, they weren't born from a lust to dominate, but from a desire to unleash the potential of the human mind. Every piece of code, every operating system was the language of a soul seeking release from the chains of mediocrity. At some point, the world began to notice, and Microsoft became the emblem of a new era. But behind the triumph, few knew that there was still a young man confronting the wounds within himself. Because external success never replaces the battle inside. For Gates, success was not a throne handed to the strongest. It was a mirror reflecting all that he had tried to avoid. When fame and wealth flooded in, he realized that the fears of his youth hadn't vanished. They had only been coated with brilliance. That was when he had to enter the second stage of his journey, learning not to let success define him. Many think the peak of Gates' life was when Microsoft ruled the tech world. But in truth, the peak came much later, when he stepped away from power to face the questions no one dares to ask. He saw that all achievements were walls of protection, and when those walls crumble, what remains? The answer: a fragile human being with unhealed wounds. And from there, transformation began. Once again, he stepped away from safety, not to build an empire, but to dismantle his own. He began to learn how to give. Clean water for African children, forgotten diseases eradicated, knowledge brought to places long abandoned. This was no longer the story of a businessman. This was the story of a man who made peace with himself. In the silence after the glory. When the applause and spotlight faded, that man sat alone, not to plan or strategize, but to listen to another sound, the echo of his own soul. He realized that for a lifetime, he had been running from one mountain to the next, but the last mountain was never Microsoft, never wealth. It was himself. At the height of success, Gates discovered a truth most men never touch. When there is nothing left to prove to the world, the real question begins: how to be free from the judgment and expectations of your own mind. There is no strategy to pass through this except the courage to face your own shadow. He left behind the throne that millions dreamed of, not out of boredom, but because he realized the greatest victory is not standing above all, but kneeling low, enough to listen and to heal. When African children drink clean water, when forgotten diseases are eradicated, when knowledge reaches the remotest corners, there you see a different Gates, not a tech genius, but a man reconciled with himself. In the final years of this journey, he became the symbol of a quieter strength, the strength of awakening. No longer driven by the chaos of competition and self-proving, Gates chose to return to simplicity, to values no one can purchase: kindness, inner wisdom, and freedom from ego. If you look closely at this story, you will see that every rejection, every failure, every moment of being underestimated, they were all training. In the end, what remains is a soul strong enough not to break, and a heart wide enough to give. And like everyone who has ever stood at the edge of their own abyss, he finally understood: the greatest freedom is not power over others, but freedom from the need for power. Not having everything, but no longer needing to hold on to everything. The man who once dropped out of Harvard to pursue a dream the world called insane finally found the answer he had been seeking from the very beginning: that life is not a race to surpass others, but a long journey to meet yourself. Here, all the noise falls away, comparison dissolves, the burden of expectations crumbles. Only silence remains, and out of that silence, a new kind of magnetism is born: the magnetism of a soul no longer bound.